Okay, the story. So everybody watching this video has three things in common, at least three things. First is that we are embodied. To be a human, to be watching this video, means to have a body. Everybody has one. To be born into a body doesn't mean that your body won't perish. In order for humans, when born into bodies, to survive, they require copious amounts of care from others. Now you can hear that as care from mothers, but I prefer it to just be care from others. And almost always there is a primary caregiver. It can be a dad, as in my case with my kiddo, or it can be a mom, as in more heteronormative, typical cases. It doesn't matter. It can be an uncle. It can be a grandparent. It doesn't even have to be a family member. It can be the state of California. It can be the foster care system. It can be the professional parent that helped you through your early days. Primary caregiver, though, is the human who keeps the infant human from dying. Infants, when born into bodies, are born into bodies of pure need. Their lack of motor skills prevents them from going to the fridge to get the food they need, pulling the blanket up when they get cold, changing their own diaper. All of this stuff to keep the human infant alive is stuff that's done by another person. That person we can just refer to as the primary caregiver. Now, the infant quickly realizes that this primary caregiver is key to them. Now, does this infant realize the third element that binds everybody on this call? No. What is that third element? You've already guessed it. In order to be a human, you have to be embodied. In order for that body to survive, it has to receive care. And in order for that body to remain human, it must inevitably perish, die. Death is the third element here. According to Lacan, the human infant is very close to death, not because it's on the verge of dying, but because its birth and this period that some people refer to as the fourth trimester and beyond is a period in which the child very much resembles a dead thing. It can't move, it can't do anything. It's a fragmented body. Its lack of motor skills make it seem like it's almost in its death throes. When you look at the baby wiggling around sometimes, it looks almost like it's dying rather than learning how to live, is Lacan's point. The child realizes very early on that they depend on this other being, and they develop very quickly a desire for this person. And this desire, we won't go into how this happens, is insatiable. It's a desire for another person. In other words, another body. Desire is always hooked into the embodied form. And it is always a desire for another body, another embodied form. So the child quickly learns to desire the primary caregiver and cries about it, and eventually learns to issue demands about it in order to get that desire met. Now, it's an insatiable desire for love, so it'll never be fully met, which is why the child will oftentimes ask for this, and then when you get it for them, ask for that, and then when you get that for them, ask for something different. What matters is not the thing you're getting for them, but the care that you provide when you show up with it, which for them is a demonstration of love. And because their desire for the primary caregiver's love, care, and affection is insatiable, it's no surprise that these requests or these demands follow back to back, end to end. Desire, as we know, is an insatiable experience, constantly reproducing new objects to desire. What the child realizes, though, and each of us did this, was that the primary caregiver isn't only interested in the baby. The primary caregiver has other interests. It can be another sibling that also requires care. It can be a job that requires its own kind of care because rent still has to be paid. It can be a little flat thing, mirrored in surface, a cipher to the child at first, a smartphone. The parent has other interests, other places where they direct their attention. And the child, although they lack gross motor skills and fine motor skills, has a very perceptive field of vision and a quickly perceptive, if not very good at interpreting, but at least an observational mind. It can see the primary caregiver smile at the smartphone. Can't do anything about it, but it can see their attention, in other words, divided between the infant in need and the smartphone in hand. Now, whatever that thing is that the infant imagines to be a competitor for the primary caregiver's attention, the infant quickly learns that its best bet is to identify with this thing, to approximate it, which is why little kids often like taking your phone from you. They're not trying to imitate you playing on their phone. They're trying to get your attention. Car keys. Yes, kids like car keys because they jingle. But kids also like car keys because that jingling sound is the signal that you are about to leave and take your attention elsewhere, to go hop in a car after the babysitter has arrived and dip for work, for fun, but regardless, without the child. So by taking your car keys and putting it down its diaper, the kid can identify with the other object that it imagines you're most interested in. Not just them, but also these car keys. And obviously, it's a way to keep you from taking off. It keeps your attention directed at the child. Not only are you like, hey, give me back those car keys, but now, at least from the child's imaginary perspective, you can't leave. Can't leave without those keys. And if the keys are in the diaper, the kid's got to come with you. You see how these things go? This imaginary object of the primary caregiver's desire has a few names in Lacanian psychoanalysis. We don't need to get into it. What we need to understand is the relationship that the primary caregiver has to it vis-a-vis the relationship that the child has to it. The child thinks that by identifying with the object of interest, they can get their desire for the primary caregiver satisfied. So they approximate the desire of the primary caregiver in order to have their desire for the primary caregiver satisfied, at least at one remove, which is imaginary, but also the beginning of the symbolic, so to speak. Doesn't mean this is where the symbolic begins. It means that the imaginary starts to take on a tinge of symbolicity in this moment. Because what else does the imaginary object of the primary caregiver's desire symbolize but an opportunity for the child to get their desire for the primary caregiver's attention met? Here again, at one remove. And that one remove is a remove of representation, of symbolization. Now, the structure of this three-part relationship, this pre-Oedipal imaginary triangle between the child, the primary caregiver, and the imaginary object, is as follows. The child imagines that the primary caregiver wants to have the object of their desire, the other object of their desire, the keys, the phone, whatever it might be. And the child, by identifying with that object of desire, hopes at some level to be it for the primary caregiver. So the assumption here, at least in the child's imaginary fantasy here, is that the primary caregiver wants to have that object, and that by becoming it through identification, by putting the phone or the key in the diaper, the child can in turn help give it to them in the form of themselves. So the primary caregiver wants to have the imaginary object, and the child wants to be the imaginary object. This imaginary pre-Oedipal triangle is also mentioned in this essay. It's the one that we hear referred to on 386, the nature of this dyadic relation. It is dyadic, but there's also this third element, this imaginary object, that converts this into a tripartite or triadic relationship. So with these three elements, we count 3, but there is one more force, the key force, and ideally the most positive and productive force in the child's life. That's where we'll head next.